You think death is a moment, a line, one side alive, other side not. That's the story, clean, simple, final. It's wrong. Death is a cascade, a sequence, a structured unraveling that takes longer than anyone is comfortable admitting and happens in an order that tells you something profound, not just about dying, but about what your mind actually is while you're living. The question isn't just what happens when you die. The question is what the dying of a mind reveals about the nature of mind itself. And if you follow that question all the way down, you end up somewhere genuinely unsettling. Not scary unsettling, true unsettling. The kind that changes how you see the thing you're using right now to read these words. Start with the assumption. Death is declared at cardiac arrest or at brain death. That's when the certificate gets signed. That's the official moment. But certification is not the same as cessation. Clinically declaring death and cellular death are not the same event. After cardiac arrest, neurons don't all die simultaneously. They die over hours, some regions faster, some slower. The brain has a hierarchy of failure, and that hierarchy is not arbitrary, it's ancient. It reflects the order in which the brain was built, layer by layer, over hundreds of millions of years of evolution. The cortex, the outermost layer, the part responsible for language, reasoning, your sense of being a thinking self, that's the newest, that goes first. Underneath it, the limbic system, older, more emotional, more primitive. Underneath that, the brainstem, the most ancient structure, the one that runs your heartbeat and your breathing and your basic arousal. That goes last. You don't lose yourself all at once. You lose yourself in a specific order. Newest first, oldest last. And when you understand that order, the question of what you actually are gets much harder to answer. In the first 10 seconds after cardiac arrest, something specific happens. Blood stops reaching the brain. Oxygen depletion begins immediately. Within about 10 seconds, consciousness flickers. Not because neurons have died yet, they are still intact, still structurally there, but because neurons can't fire without a continuous oxygen supply. The electrochemical machinery stalls. You'd expect the brain to go quiet, to wind down like a machine losing power. That's not what happens. In those first seconds, some brains show a massive increase in electrical activity. Gamma waves, the high-frequency oscillations associated with heightened perception, focused attention, and vivid conscious experience. Not a fade, a surge. The brain doesn't go gently. Something fires hard, right at the edge. A 2023 study from the University of Michigan observed this directly in dying patients, with consent, in a palliative care setting. Gamma wave surges in the moments following cardiac arrest, concentrated specifically in regions linked to dreaming, memory retrieval, and conscious experience. The posterior cortical hot zone. The area most implicated in the actual generation of conscious experience rather than just its processing. The mechanistic explanation is probably a depolarization wave. Neurons starved of oxygen lose the ability to maintain their resting potential and fire uncontrollably in a final cascade, like a system overloading as the power fails. That's the most likely explanation. But here's the problem that explanation doesn't solve. Does that surge produce experience? Is there something it feels like to be inside those seconds? The electricity is measurable. What the electricity is like from the inside, that's a different question entirely, and we don't have instruments for that. About 10 to 20% of cardiac arrest survivors report near-death experiences. The details are surprisingly consistent across cultures, across centuries, across people who had no contact with each other and no shared framework. The tunnel. The light at the end of it. A panoramic review of memories, playing back not sequentially, but all at once. A feeling of profound peace, of presence, sometimes of encountering others who had died before. The temptation, and it's a real temptation, I understand why people feel it, is to read that consistency as evidence of something beyond the brain. If this many people, this independently, report the same thing, doesn't that mean something? The neuroscience has a different read. REM intrusion, the brain's dreaming system activating during the physiological chaos of dying, overlaying vivid, internally generated experience onto the fading inputs from the outside world. Hypoxia-induced hallucinations with documented phenomenological signatures. The brain's internal predictive model, the system that's always constructing your experience of reality from prior expectation and partial data, running without external input and generating maximum intensity experience as a result. These are real mechanisms, documented, reproducible, experimentally supported. But here's where intellectual honesty requires a hard stop. Those mechanisms explain how the dying brain generates vivid, structured experience. They don't tell us whether anything persists after the brain stops entirely. That's a different question, and the honest answer is that nobody knows. The neuroscience doesn't close it, the physics doesn't close it. Anyone telling you confidently either way that NDEs prove survival or that they definitively prove nothing survives is outrunning the evidence. The dying brain generates extraordinary experience. What happens after the brain is fully stopped is still genuinely open. Here's something most people don't know, and it should probably change how you act around people who appear unresponsive. Hearing is the last sense to go. EEG studies conducted in palliative care settings, patients who are unresponsive, who show no behavioral signs of awareness, who appear by every external measure to be unconscious, show continued auditory processing. The brain is still receiving and responding to sound after the person can no longer respond to it in any visible way. The people in the room talking as if no one can hear them, the things said at bedsides, the goodbyes spoken too late or not at all because someone assumed the moment had already passed. The neuroscience says the moment probably hadn't passed yet. And it's not just hearing. The brain's default mode network, the distributed system responsible for your sense of self, your internal narrative, your autobiographical memory, the quiet background hum of being you, continues to show activity after other systems have failed. The self, or something that functions like the self, persists longer than the self's ability to communicate its persistence. There may be minutes, not hours, not a long time, but real minutes, during which something that functions like selfhood continues after the point where everyone in the room believes it has ended. That's not mysticism, that's what the electrodes show. And now we hit the wall, the real one. Everything described so far, the surge, the auditory persistence, the default mode network outlasting the body's other functions, all of that is description of hardware, measurable electrical activity, mappable neural correlates. The instruments can track it. What the instruments cannot track is the thing that makes any of this matter at all: consciousness, subjective experience. The fact that there is something it feels like to be you, not just that your brain processes information, but that the processing is accompanied by experience, by the redness of red, by the specific quality of grief or joy, or the recognition of a face you love. We don't know what produces that, not really. We know which brain regions correlate with which experiences. We can disrupt regions and change experiences. We can map the neural correlates with increasing precision. But the gap between this region fires and this is what it feels like, that gap has not been closed, not even close to closed. That's not a temporary gap waiting for better instruments. Some of the most serious philosophers and neuroscientists alive think it may be a fundamental limit. At death, we can watch every measurable correlate of consciousness disappear, one by one, in sequence. And we still cannot say, with any scientific authority, whether experience itself disappears at the same moment. Because we don't know what experience is, separate from its correlates. We don't know if the map is the territory, or if the map is just a map. That's the hard problem of consciousness. And it lands exactly here, right at the edge of death, with more force than anywhere else. What does physics say? The matter and energy that constitute you right now, the carbon, the hydrogen, the electrical charges moving through your neurons, none of that is destroyed at death. Energy is conserved. Matter transforms. The atoms that are you will be parts of other things, indefinitely, for as long as the universe runs. But atoms aren't you. You're a pattern, a specific, extraordinarily complex configuration of matter and energy, a particular arrangement, a particular set of relationships, an information structure of staggering intricacy. And that pattern does disperse. Entropy wins. The configuration doesn't reassemble. The information spreads out into the environment in a form so degraded it's effectively gone. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. There's a principle in physics, debated, not settled, but taken seriously, that information is never truly destroyed. Not even black holes destroy information, Hawking eventually conceded after decades of resistance. The information transforms, encodes into different states, becomes inaccessible in practice, but in principle, the physics says it's preserved. Does that apply to the information that constitutes a mind, to the pattern that is you? The physics doesn't say. There's no equation that tells you whether the information structure of a conscious mind has any special status, whether it persists in some encoded form, or whether information preserved in the physics sense has anything to do with experience preserved in any meaningful sense. The silence of the physics on that question is one of the most unsettling things I know. Pull back now. Because there's something in all of this that points back at the living, not just the dying. The fact that the mind fails in a specific sequence, cortex first, brainstem last, hearing at the very end, tells you the mind is layered, modular, not one unified thing, but a stack of systems of different ages, different functions, different degrees of fragility. The part of you that narrates your life, that internal voice, that continuous sense of being a self with a past and a future, that feeling of being the author of your own experience, that's the newest part, the most recently evolved, the most metabolically expensive, and the first to go. The oldest parts, the ones that regulate your heartbeat, your breathing, your basic alertness, those are the most durable. Those are the last to fall. What you experience as yourself, your identity, your memories, your inner monologue, the story you tell about who you are, that is the thinnest, most fragile layer of what you are. It sits on top of machinery far older and far more robust than it is. And at death, the machinery outlasts the story. Somehow, that makes the story feel more remarkable, not less. The fact that this thin, fragile, metabolically extravagant layer of self-awareness exists at all, that the universe built matter complex enough to ask questions about its own nature, that's not diminished by knowing how easily it ends. It's actually more astonishing. You are, right now, a pattern of matter that is aware of itself, that knows it will end, that can ask what ending means. No other arrangement of matter we've ever found does that. And the fact that it's temporary doesn't make it less real. It makes it exactly as real as it is, which is completely, entirely, unrepeatable real. What happens to your mind the second you die? It begins to come apart in a specific order. It fires hard one last time. It hears things longer than anyone realizes. It holds the shape of a self for a few minutes past the point you'd expect. And then the pattern disperses, and the matter goes on to be other things. Whether experience goes with it, whether there is something it is like to be those last minutes, we genuinely do not know. And the fact that we don't know is not a failure of science. It's an honest marker at the edge of the hardest question anyone has ever asked. You're on this side of that edge right now, thinking about it, aware of it. That by itself is extraordinary.